Hi, everybody. I am Michael Hartman, and this is
Pang Hartman.
and we are from Frogdice, a video game studio. We're located here in Lexington. We opened in 1996, so we've been doing this now for about 21 years, and we're going to share some of our experiences and insights on game design and game development on a budget. Since it's you're more than welcome at any time. If you have a question or want to, us to elaborate on something, just raise your hand and we'll call on you, and it's no problem. It's, totally free form here. So we're going to start off talking about, before you can even design a game on a budget, you have to have a budget. So you have to have some kind of funds to even get rolling. So there's a lot of different things you can do to get started. First of all, there's your own, one of the most common is your own savings. A lot of indie game developers will start off, they're in some kind of other job and they save up some money, either so they can work on the game on the side, or so if they want to go full-time, they have enough of a nest egg so that they can support themselves. So savings, first thing. Second thing, the most common way people raise money is friends and family. You reach out to friends and family who may want to either loan you some money or invest in your company. You have various ways you can do that officially. You can do a convertible debt note, or you can just do a loan, or they could just, maybe they just give you some money to help you get started. There's all kinds of possibilities there. Those are your easiest ways to get started. The things you're gonna need that money for are usually software, licenses, hardware, those kind of things. Now, since you're working on a budget, you're going to want to save money in as many ways as you can. If you're a student, you can often get a lot of software for free, and depending on the licensing, it may even be completely acceptable to use that software during the development stage for a potential commercial product, or even at least just your first game. Examples of that would be, Photoshop, various Adobe products, Maya, things like that you can usually get for free as a student. And if you are a student, you should definitely take advantage of that, because it's a extremely expensive software that you can get for free. So definitely make use of that resource. The next thing you'll want to figure out is an engine, and Pang's going to talk about that more in a minute. But those are kind of the things you're going to need money for right off the bat. Probably a lot of things that people get sucked into is thinking, oh, well, once I get a rough idea for my game, maybe some concept art, I'm going to get on Kickstarter and I'm going to raise, $20, $30, $50,000 to make my game. Well, that may have been true about 3 or 4 years ago on Kickstarter, but that ship has completely sailed. Like, if you don't have a built-in fan base already, the odds of raising more than $500 or $1,000 on Kickstarter are exceptionally slim. So don't go into your plan thinking, oh, I'm going to get a little bit done and then I'm going to go on Kickstarter and I'm going to raise money, because that's almost definitely going to fail. To succeed on Kickstarter, you're going to need some fans. Kind of a good metric is you want maybe a few thousand Facebook followers for your studio or your game, or something equivalent on other social media. Or even better, if you've built up a mailing list. If you've built up a list of email addresses, 500, 1,000, 2,000 people that have expressed interest in your game, whether they've seen you show it at shows like this, or they've seen it online, or you've put demos, or all kinds of things like that that you can use to build some interest, you're going to need that before you can even consider doing a Kickstarter. So I'm going to let Pang talk about some of the software and other things that you're going to want to do on a budget.
So once you have your budget, however big or small it is, you're going to have to be pretty careful on how you decide to design your game and how you get going on the game. So there's a couple of places that you can really sink a lot of money that you have to be really careful about not doing, and that's just spending a ton of time on trying to get finalized art before you even start your game. And a lot of people will do that. They think that, oh, if I have something awesome and beautiful and I'll just show it and then I'll get a bunch of money for it. And that can work with big studios. There's some studios that have spectacular artists and they can put out basically fake gameplay. That's not going to be very likely in our type of budget. So having some good concepts is great, but don't just dump a ton of time and money into art you may never ever use, besides just flashing it up real quick and saying, hey, look at my art. Your thing that you want to focus on is having solid game design. And you can do that really cheap. Google Docs, your Microsoft Word, even Notepad, or even a pad of paper and pencil. Get really good game design down. Don't elaborate too much, because the other place that you can spend a ton of money is too much game design, where you have no way to prototype an entire game design document if you have 3,000-page game design document that you spent 6 years on. And you may consider that cheap, but time is worth something. And if you spend 3 years designing a game that is impossible to prototype because it's so huge, then you've basically wasted a lot of money, a lot of your budget. And time is really something you can't get back too. So get basic game design down, and then you want to start rapidly prototyping. And that may be you tear up pieces of paper and play your game literally on the table in front of you. Or what I do sometimes is I'll create a screenshot and literally pretend to hit the buttons using Photoshop or even MS Paint or whatever you can get your hands on, just to see if, hey, is this game playable? Do I have most of the kinks worked out? Does this even function? Because what you don't want is when you're doing game design on a budget is you really don't want to have a whole lot of art invested up front that you may be just completely tossing away. Art and programming is extremely expensive. Doing some quick MS Paint screenshots or whatever and pushing some buttons, fake buttons, is really, really inexpensive. So you want to take the most inexpensive routes possible to show that you even have a viable game. Now, once you get to the point where you're pretty sure, hey, this game's pretty fun because I'm just mashing pretend buttons and I'm having fun, then you'll start down actually creating your first programmed prototype. And doing that, you still don't need art. You can just, copy and paste something, or literally use 3D boxes. If you're doing a 3D piece or something, just use boxes, and they can be there for your players, your objects, anything. You want to. The point being that you want to do it really fast and cheap. Once you're pretty sure that you know what you want to do, then your next step is to decide how you want to put your studio together. If you're going to do it by yourself, if you're going to do it with more than one person, and and how your studio is going to be set up.
Yeah, if you're looking at not doing this as a solo project, which is a very daunting task, it's very possible, but it's extremely difficult. You're probably going to want a couple of people to work with you. I always say the core team that you typically need if you want to be successful commercially with a game, you need a programmer, you need an artist, and you need a business person. And you really need all three. Now, if you're only two people, it's possible that someone can fill multiple roles, but those are really the three critical roles that you need, and they really are all equally important. Because obviously with no code, you have no game. With no art, there's nothing for people to use. And with no business person, you're never going to sell your game. You're never going to function as a business. So all three of those roles are absolutely critical. You may notice I didn't mention sound and music. Those are valuable things in a game, but they are probably the most easy ones to outsource or to use third parties that can, you can purchase directly some sound effects, some music, sound effect packages. It's one of the easier ones to do in that way. Although I will say, if you have a person who's really good with sound and music, that is definitely a bonus, because it is certainly nice to have that. But compared to the other three roles, it's a little bit of a luxury.
A caveat being, if you make your game all about sound and music,
right,
then of course you need a sound and music person.
Right, like if it's a rhythm game or something like that, then obviously you better have a great music person. Something else I wanted to add to what she said is video games in a lot of ways are just the same as any other software product. You need that they call it the MVP, your minimum viable product. That's what you want to get to as quickly as possible, so you have some idea if even your core game is viable or fun at all. And then once you have that MVP, you can start iterating on it. So once you have your team. Maybe you've done something like in our area. You have Run Jump Dev. It's a group of game designer, game developers. If say you're a programmer, you might need a group like that to find an artist. If you're not from this area, there may be a group like that in your area. Or you can go online. You can find Facebook groups about game developers, subreddits about game development, or subreddits about the genre of the game you're wanting to work on, and you might be able to find some people who are interested in your game and may be willing to be the artist that you need, or to be the business person or something like that. Of course, hooking up with people that way, there are perils because they're strangers and it's harder to trust those people. If you can find a local group like Run Jump Dev here, that's definitely much better. You can get to know people. Or, if you're a student, maybe you have classmates and you can divide up the tasks that way. That's a really good way to get your team started. Once you have your team, since you're working on a budget, definitely you're going to want to avoid starting up an office or anything like that. That's an enormous amount of overhead that you very likely do not need for quite a long time. Do the time-honored startup, working in the basement, working in the garage, that kind of thing. Teaming up like that. There are a lot of really good tools you can use to collaborate and work remotely. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to let Pang elaborate a little bit more specifically on online collaboration tools.
Yeah, so we mainly use Google Docs, but there's tons of stuff, Discord, Slack, Skype even, things to help you keep your team together without spending a ton of money having an office. Starting up an office is an extremely expensive cost, and what you just really need is a way to communicate with your team, whether it's verbally, visually, or through just sheer text. But either way, there's tons and tons of free tools out there to use. Like I said, even Office 365, you can share documents and things like that. Our preference is Google Docs. It's really important too to know what kind of free software you can use, and to not break licenses because people will tell you, oh, just go get it off a torrent or something. That's really not a good idea. If you have a hit at all and they find out, that's part of your money gone already. So like I said, like Michael had said, there's tons of free licenses that you can use if you're a student, or if you're not making a certain amount off of your games yet. A lot of the engines are actually free. Unreal, Unity, what else? CryEngine. They're all things to look at, whatever you're most comfortable with. And then also Maya, there are student licenses, but you can also look at Photoshop or free software like Blender. Mm-hmm. Blender's not quite as easy to use as Maya, but the basics are there. It's the same concepts. And then Photoshop, I think now is available for $10 a month. So just, do it legitimately, and just see what you can afford, and be really careful about how you proceed. Don't spend a lot of money on things that you don't need. So, for example, some of the game design choices that we made on our latest game, Stash, which is an MMO, normally extremely expensive to make, but we made some very interesting choices to be able to do it in our budget. For example, we don't have a full 3D world. All the decoration that goes into something like creating a game like World of Warcraft, just in the trees and the rocks and the ground texture, I mean, you're talking about, I'd say, several $1 million right there. So right. We didn't have $1 million. We had to come up with creative ways to design our world, so that it was still immersive for the player, but didn't cost us millions of dollars to do. So we chose to do a tabletop gaming style, so we could repeat several models without having to just constantly be creating like, oh, special tree here, whatever special other tree there. And we could do with 10 rocks instead of 50,000 rocks, that you would find in most of the MMOs out there that do cost several hundred millions to make.
Right, and because it's, actually, George, do we have internet access here? Do you have internet back there? If you want to pull up while we're talking about it, just Google Stash RPG trailer. Make sure it's on the Frogdice Inc. YouTube channel, and then pull it up while we're talking about it, if you don't mind. Since our world is tabletop style, every square on the grid represents basically approximately a square mile. So if you think about that, in one small 1 inch by 1 inch grid approximately, we're able to represent a mile of space in a game, whereas in a fully 3D, third person over the shoulder camera MMO like World of Warcraft or something, you have to actually create all that space for people to walk through. And unfortunately, most of that space literally is just walkthrough space. So you're not getting a tremendous amount of bang for your buck. It's very immersive, and there's not like there's anything wrong with that, but it's an enormous amount of money invested in something that isn't the core experience. So by doing our world in this tabletop fashion, we saved ourselves an enormous amount of art budget. And then we did some things game design-wise also. And as you'll see eventually when the trailer comes up, Stash uses turn-based combat, which is something like turn-based on a grid, Dungeons and Dragons style, that kind of thing, which is something we actually wanted stylistically because of games that we've played in the past that we really liked. But the other benefit is it is much more efficient server load because you're not having to communicate with the server, 100 times a second to keep track of where everybody's character is. You only have to keep track every few seconds when somebody moves their miniature. So we had some both artistic and game design decisions that were made not only for style reasons, but also because they saved us a lot of money in art assets and server load and server architecture.
And you can even build into your game, hey, if I release my game and I make $1 million on the first day, you can improve a lot of things too. So right now our inventory is simply a little icon that we repeat over and over, and the short description, like a text description of the item. And that saves us from having to make a gajillion of icons that you find on a regular MMO that have done graphical inventories. Now, we also have it set up so that when we get to the point, if we get to the point that our game is doing really well, we can switch over to a graphical inventory. So you can plan these things into your game design on steps where you would slowly increase your art budget or increase your programming budget based off of how well your studio is doing, which is kind of a good way to go about it when you have a very fixed budget and income for your game.
Right. That's kind of like the same, have a minimum viable product that you can iterate on, but even when you get to the point of not your minimum viable product, but your release product, design it in a way that not only is the game scalable as far as people able to play it, but scalable as far as adding content. Don't paint yourself in a corner so that you need, if I don't have 500 dungeons, then the game doesn't work. Make sure the game can work with 20 dungeons that then you can build on if the game has any kind of traction or success. Yes, sir.
How do you estimate, once you've got the MVP, how do you estimate development costs like QA and things like that where you're doing bug fixes? Can you foresee that? Or is that something that you have to kind of incrementally build on?
Well, that comes from, first of all, having good project management from the very beginning, setting your milestones, and during the development process, especially if you don't have any experience yet in software development or game design, like if you've never worked in the industry in any way, it's going to take you a little time to nail down your project management. But basically what you need to do during development, you start setting milestones like, okay, here's my overall plan. You've already designed the game. Now you need to design your project management. At the end of this month, I want to have this part finished, then month 2, this part, month 3, and you set all those milestones out. What we normally do is we have like our macro milestones, which are our huge major systems will be done by this month or this quarter or something like that. And then we start on a month or 2 in advance, we break it down weekly. Now, over time, what you'll start to experience is how good you are at estimating. So that's why you want to make sure it's all written down very clearly, month to month, week to week. So then as you either reach milestones or miss milestones, you're like, oh, wow, every milestone I estimated, I missed on average by 50%. Well, from now on, I better estimate another 50%. And after a few months of doing that, you'll start to get a lot better at setting those milestones and being reasonable with them.
You also get a better idea of your team,
right,
and how likely they are to put bugs into certain systems. Like we know we have 2 programmers, and they're both very good in very different ways, but we know that it's very likely that one of our programmers does something, we're going to be testing it and finding it to break repeatedly over the next, 2 or 3 months. And so it's really important to, take the time to do it. Sometimes, like what we did was we did small projects first that were basically training and evaluating our team. We just happened to go ahead and sell the game that we made afterwards. But that was a very, very valuable experience. We made smaller games. We put them out fast. They weren't what we would say are the most beautiful, awesomest game ever. But the value that we got from it was the fact that we knew how our team worked before we invested into a really, really big game. And I think that's also part of figuring out your budget and making sure your money really works for you, because even though that game wasn't our best game in the world, it still sold 50,000 copies. I don't remember how much we sold it for, but it sold enough that it kept our studio going too, while we were learning instead of just taking 3 months to train.
Yeah,
we trained on a game.
So exactly. So you have to practice with project management. You have to practice with estimating. And you want to do that on as small a scale as possible. So when you're wrong, when you think, I think this small game will cost us $20,000 to make, if it ends up costing you $40,000, well, now you've learned something, but hopefully you did it on a small enough scale that it didn't, put you out of business. And then as you learn that, you'll be able to estimate. You'll know, hey, this kind of system, we made it, and ended up also taking us 6 weeks to fully debug it and get it perfect. So next time we milestone a system, let's plan 6 weeks to also debug it.
Right.
So
because you get people too, and I'm sorry, in our team, there's also somebody who overestimates every single project, always, like by 2 or 3 weeks. He'll be like, this is going to take us 3 months, and it'll take us like 6 weeks, and that's something good to know too. And it's really a sheer amount of time and number of projects that you've worked on that you will figure this out. And then also, to answer your question finally, sometimes there's going to be things that come up you literally cannot predict. Nobody knows what's going on. It's going to take you 2 weeks to diagnose it and then another 2 weeks to fix. And that's just something that comes with game development or software development in general, I think.
Can I say real quick? Do you want to play this with sound or just kind of in the background?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No problem. Yes, ma'am.
You said you sold your first game like 50,000 copies. Had you done a lot of social media? How were you able to do that?
Well, yeah. Let me. I know what she's talking about. That's she means like one of our first game on Steam.
Oh, sorry.
Our oldest game is a text mud called Threshold that I actually started while I was in law school as a hobby. So that game, it's over 20 years old, and over those 20 years, it's had hundreds of thousands of customers. So we already had a pretty large built-in fan base before we put even a single game on Steam. We had that game. We made an experimental social game. We made our first Unity game was a match 3 game that we launched only on Big Fish Games and on our own website. And then our first game that we put on Steam was called Dungeon of Elements, and it was an RPG puzzle hybrid like Dr. Mario. And so by the time we put that game on Steam, we already had a pretty significant built-in fan base. We'd also had a successful Kickstarter for that game, so we had built-in fans from that. And that's kind of like what I was talking about with Kickstarter. You have to do everything you can to build your fan base through as many different means possible. And social media is one part. Being active in as many game communities as you can without spending all your time. That's a really valuable thing too. It's really easy because sometimes that's fun to be involved in those communities. It's really easy to spend too much time socially being involved and not enough time working on your product. And then you think you're getting real work done, but you're really kind of spinning your wheels. But at the same time, you can't ignore that. So it's easy to spend too much time, but you need to really kind of set yourself some kind of timetable. Like I'm going to spend the first hour of my day when I first wake up and I've got my cup of coffee. That's my social media, Reddit, forums time, and that's when I'll do most of that stuff. And then I'll try to ignore it maybe until the evening when I'm, just kind of relaxing or something like that, rather than finding yourself having spent 10 hours on Reddit and really not accomplishing much. So building that fan base is absolutely crucial to having success on Kickstarter, on everything, because those people are going to be, they're going to be your word of mouth that really spreads information about your game.
Yeah, and don't discount like your physical fan base too. Whether that's like your church group, your reading group, your writing group, whatever groups you're a part of. Often those people are very, very valuable. Getting involved in things like Run Jump Dev, where you have a whole collection of developers and gamers who can help you expand yourself, your library system, all these things, your city. Those are all things that you can be a part of and get them to be fans of yours, if that makes sense.
Right. So kind of building off of that question. So assume everything goes right. You have a team, you have some money, you make your game, and now you're trying to launch your game. There's a lot of things that when you're working on a budget, there's a lot of really easy mistakes that you can make that can hamstring the sales of your game and then the whole financial viability of your company. So let's assume you get your game on Steam as an example, because that's not as hard nowadays as it once was. You can put it on Greenlight. Greenlight, I should have mentioned that also. But once you have a decent trailer and if you have a demo, that can be cool too. Although demos, I'll actually go into something about demos in a minute. Once you have a good trailer and some good screenshots and some good where you can actually show gameplay, you can put your game on Greenlight and start building your fan base that way as well, and that's free. And when you first launch it on Greenlight, you will get a lot of publicity right then. So don't think, oh, I'll have this kind of halfway done trailer, I'll put it up on Greenlight just to start getting votes. Like, you don't want to do that, because that is when you first launch it, that's your highest amount of visibility. You want to make sure that your trailer is pretty decent and your screenshots are pretty good and that you're showing some real gameplay and that you have time to camp that Greenlight page and answer questions. Anytime you put anything about your game on anywhere, on any site, on any store, on any social media, you need to make sure you check that religiously, especially right after you put it on, because you'll have a lot of exposure right then, and you want to make sure you're responding rapidly to people. So getting on Greenlight, assume you get enough votes, you get on Steam, and now you launch your game on Steam. First of all, there will be many people who will try to get you to have some kind of huge launch discount of your game. That's usually a bad idea. Something really small, maybe 10% for the first week, is okay to get people who see your game pull the trigger, but anything more significant than that is going to hurt the sales of your game in the long term, because people, now all that information is stored forever. There are so many sites where you can see the cheapest a game was ever sold, and a lot of game purchasers are savvy about that stuff now, and they might see your game and think, wow, that game's really cool. Oh, wow, it's only $10. Then they'll Google and they'll see, oh man, but at launch it was $5. Well, I'll just wait for them to put it on sale again for $5. So that's a really huge mistake, having a big launch discount. Another thing that will happen is, as soon as your game launches on Steam, you will get pummeled with people reaching out to you by email saying, oh, I represent this YouTube channel, this Twitch channel, this gaming group, this Steam group. We have 500 million users, and if you give us 4 codes to your game, we'll promote your game and you'll get all these sales. The vast majority of those are completely bogus. They won't get you any sales. All they're doing is they're getting your codes so they can then resell your codes on a third-party site.
For like 30 cents.
Yeah, for a few pennies. Or they're using them in giveaways to promote whatever their other activities are. The odds of them actually promoting your game are extremely slim. And usually the people that are members of their Steam groups or whatever are only there for free games anyway. So even seeing them theoretically promote your game a little bit won't drive sales either.
And you'll know the names that are legit, that yes, you definitely want to give your Steam keys to these people.
Right.
Those names are very recognizable.
But even those, you actually have to be careful, because there are a lot of people who will pull scams on that. Like someone might mail you and say, oh, I'm a representative of Total Biscuit and he wants to play your game. And their email might be Total Biscuit at Gmail, or they may have, or Total Biscuit at Hotmail. They found some version of his name that he hadn't grabbed the email address of, and he can make it look very legit. So if you get an email from a YouTuber, here's what I normally do. I get an email from a YouTuber or a Twitch stream. They're like, hi, I'm so-and-so. I want to stream your game. I want to make YouTube videos about your game. So if I click on their channel, whether I've heard of them or not, and I see, what kind of subscriber base they have, and that's the first step. Then I also look at their videos to see how many views they have, because you'll sometimes see channels and they'll have 50,000 subscribers, but then you look at their actual videos, say their last 20, 30 videos, and they'll have like 17 views. Well, if somebody has 50,000 subscribers, but their average video has 50 or 100 views, most likely those subscribers are just bought. They've paid some third-party service to give them fake subscribers. They're not really getting any views. And if they don't get views, then making a video about your game won't do anything. Now, if I go to their channel and it looks pretty good, like, wow, they have a nice amount of subscribers and their videos get, 1,000, 5,000 views, whatever. Now I need to make sure that I was legitimately reached out to by that person. Sometimes on their About page, they'll have a business email contact. Now, if that business email contact matches identically with the one you got, well, that's a good sign. If it doesn't, then what I'll normally do is I'll reach out to them on Twitter or through their business email contact, and I'll say, hey, I got this email. I'll usually be, forwarding it to them. I just wanted to make sure this was you and everything and make sure it's above board. In my experience, 95% of the time it's not, because especially if you're an indie dev, you're probably not going to have very many huge YouTubers, Twitch streamers seeking you out. Now, on the flip side, you might be able to seek them out and successfully get them to be interested in your game.
And this is some really good low budget marketing.
Right. One thing that we've done with our last 3 games is we spent a lot of time on Twitch and YouTube finding Twitch streamers and YouTube channels who liked to stream or make videos about games similar to the ones we made. We didn't just, in fact, I've never reached out to PewDiePie, for example, because, the odds of him wanting to play one of our games are pretty low. I've looked for other streamers and YouTubers who played games similar to ours because the odds are higher that they're going to be interested. And then I would just send them an email, and keep it simple. Hey, I'm a developer with this studio. We've made this game, 1 or 2 sentences about the game. Is this something you'd be interested in streaming or making videos about? And assuming you've targeted people appropriately and not just mass spammed 500 YouTubers from some list you found, you'll get some pretty good returns. And some of those people will be very excited, like, hey, yeah, your game looks really cool. I would love to stream it, or I would love to, make a YouTube video. And in that case, that's a perfect person to give them a Steam key and let them play it, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, be very, very careful about the random solicitations. The biggest,
Including bundles. Really.
right? Yeah, I'll go into that too. But yeah, the Steam groups, the ones people asking you, hey, we have giveaways every month. Will you give us 5 keys for a giveaway? In my experience and all the colleagues I've ever spoken to, giveaways do absolutely nothing. All they do is devalue your product and make people think your game is just, a prize in a cereal box, basically. Giveaways, no good. Don't do them. If you are involved in a charity or something and they're doing a giveaway to promote their charity and it's a charity you believe in, then absolutely do giveaways. But in that case, you're really mainly doing it to help the charity, not really to promote your game, because it's not going to do much to promote your game. You're doing that for personal reasons, which are perfectly wonderful and acceptable. But yeah, don't get sucked into the claims that, oh, we'll give your game away 10 copies and you'll sell 1,000. You won't sell any. But yeah, so Pang mentioned bundles. There are, I don't even know how many bundles out there now, hundreds maybe. But really, there are very few that are any good at all. Humble Bundle is the king of all bundles. And if you can get your game in a Humble Bundle, that is excellent. But there is still a downside. You do not want to be in a Humble Bundle in the first, most likely 3 to 6 months of your game being out. Because once your game has been in a bundle, think about it like this. They might have 10 games in a bundle. People can pay what they want. They have to pay at least $1, which means some people will pay $1. Well, that means now they got your game for 10 cents. Now, most people who buy a Humble Bundle, it's usually because 1, 2, or 3 of the games in the bundle were interesting to them, and they don't really care about the other ones. Now, if you're lucky, they'll keep the other ones and actually play it. If you're unlucky, they'll take the other 7 keys and they'll go to G2A or somebody like that and sell your key. And that devalues the value of your game also, because now when someone actually finds your game on Steam and is excited about it, if they Google it to buy it somewhere else, they'll, instead of buying your game for $10 or $15, they buy it for 10 cents. So even Humble Bundle, which is the king of all bundles and by far the best, and we've been in 2 different Humble Bundles, and both experiences were amazing, and we loved it, and we would do it again. But there is a downside, and you have to be careful about that. I would definitely not recommend being in any bundle, Humble or otherwise, unless you feel like you're relatively near the end of the product lifestyle of your game, because from the point after that Humble Bundle, it will be much harder to sell your game anywhere close to full price. And if it's the smaller bundles, it's even worse. And another part of that to really, really be aware of, a lot of the smaller or mid-sized bundles, if they reach out to you and say, hey, we'd like to have your game in our bundle, one thing to really make certain of is that they will give you back the unsold keys. A lot of times they'll say, hey, we want your game in a bundle, give us 10,000 Steam keys. And you're like, oh, a lot of people get, oh my God, I'm going to sell 10,000 copies of my game. That's wonderful. But when the bundle actually happens, they may only sell 300 copies of your game. Now, one way that some of the shadier bundles make money then is they take those other 9,700 keys, sell them on some site for 10 cents, but that's another $1,000 that they made and you made nothing. So you need to make absolutely certain that any bundle that you do sell it in, that they will give you back the unsold keys, and then you go through Steam to have those keys invalidated. So even if they gave them back to you but kept them and start selling them elsewhere, at least you've invalidated those keys. So I know this, I might have kind of pummeled you now with a lot of information, but these things are a lot easier than they may sound. If you get your game on Steam, you will get a Steam rep that you can talk to, and they're usually very, very helpful and will help you with some of these same, pitfalls, because they've seen these things happen to tons of people as well. So let's see.
Does anybody have any questions or?
Yeah, I kind of did an info dump there. Any questions about any of that? Yes.
How do you track your costs and your expenses and allocate it in certain ways where you can say, okay, game development, art, QA, all those things have different elements, and can you justify costs for doing different things? How do you quantify all that?
Well, first of all, every game is different. So there's definitely no hard and fast rule like 30% code, 30% art, 30% marketing, nothing like that. There's definitely no rule. Some games are more art intensive, some games are more code intensive. So you're going to have to make your best estimate based on the type of game that you have. You can roughly estimate that if a game takes you 3 months to make, you probably are going to need 3 months of testing and bug fixing. That's a relatively reliable rule of thumb, that however long it takes you to make something, it'll take you that long also to fix it and debug it and polish it. So you can budget for that. So that'll help you. But yeah, so the main thing as far as figuring out your cost is, you look at your team, you look at their salary, you look at how long you think it's going to take you to make the game, and then, you multiply those things together, and there's your budget. Of course, adding in the cost for hardware and software and things like that.
General running of the studios.
Right.
Or?
If you don't have, if you've minimized your overhead, that makes it easier. You don't have rent, you don't have utilities, things like that. Mm-hmm. Now, the really tricky thing is to budget in marketing. If you're really just starting off, it's likely that your marketing budget is going to be almost non-existent. And that's not the end of the world. It just means you're going to have to make up for it through Twitch streamers, YouTubers, word of mouth, using things like Greenlight, social media, web forums, all that kind of stuff. Ideally, it would be nice to have at least a few $1,000s, $5,000, $10,000 at least to devote to marketing. just so you can maybe go to, you can try to get into the indie mega booth at PAX. That's probably going to cost you at minimum $10,000 if you have that in your budget. But if not, you do have some other opportunities. Facebook ads, Twitter ads, things like that can be effective if you're very careful with it.
Well, if you're talking about extreme budget, which is like when you're first starting and you're with maybe a group of friends or something like that, you should still really be careful about keeping a budget based off of time. If everybody's working for free or just on a project, you can guarantee that half of them will drop out if the project goes on too long. Some of them will drop out even if the project doesn't go on too long. So you have to be prepared for that. So try to have even if you're just a bunch of people, friends getting together to work on something, make sure you have a time budget on how long you think you're going to be in development, so you can keep pushing milestones and accomplishments, because it's really, really hard to keep people like that engaged. And just always be mindful that even though you think it's just your time, that is a very valuable commodity and it has a worth of some sort. So you should budget for it.
Right. Yes. Right.
Right. Well, leadership matters so much more when you're working on a very small budget. You can't lure people with, here's vacation packages or signing bonuses or whatever. So you're always going to have to drive your team in a manner that is effective for them.
Right. And that makes it important too, if it's your very first game, to definitely keep it small. I just read a recent piece of data about Steam that's kind of depressing. I believe it's something like 85% of indie games launched on Steam sell less than $500 in their lifetime. So odds are, if it's your very first game, that's what you're looking at. So
It's worse for mobile.
So don't assume, right. So don't assume that your first game is gonna make $500,000 and justify the entire studio's experience. Almost kind of like, we went to a writer who went to Joseph Beth, Kevin Hearn, and he had a kind of a cool statement when he talked about how to get started as a novelist. And he said the first novel you write is going to be crap, but the next novel you write is going to be less crap. And the same thing is usually true with video games also. So if you build up some amount of money, say $50,000 or $100,000 to start your studio, it would behoove you to make something really small, to learn a lot of these lessons and make a lot of mistakes, and learning, like you were saying, about how do I budget our project. You learn a million things about project management and estimating and bug fixing and business. And if you can make a game, again, say you have this mystery $100,000 that you've raised through savings, friends and family, whatever. If that first game only costs you $15,000, $20,000 to make, well, if it only makes $500, you're not sunk. And you can take all those lessons and you can make a more ambitious game then that has a better chance of success.
Because it looks like so many people see these stories and they're like, oh, Notch's first game was Minecraft. I'll guarantee you that's not his first coding project at all. He probably made thousands and thousands of tiny little games or dropped projects and moved on until he found that one that he could sink his teeth into and really, expand upon it. But it's really hard and deceptive, especially for some of us who are trying to raise kids who have read these stories, and they're like, oh, well, Notch just made this one game, and look, he sold it for $400 million or $4 billion, sorry. And that's just, that's not how the real story goes.
Right. Yes.
I saw this one website where it highlighted the revenue of each game, installs and mostly mobile, and also microtransactions. And it seemed like, okay, that's great if you can hit it, because most of the games at the top are all the popular kind of games.
Right.
And be able to pitch that to a stakeholder, say, we want to build a game like this, here's the ultimate potential, like you mentioned, here's the realistic potential for the first game. Are there any sources out there like that you
Well, it's really difficult. The gaming industry is so secretive. It's actually really hard to get any of those stats that are actually accurate. When we went to raise money, one of the best things that we had was our own stats based off of games that we had made, even small games. One of the reasons we made one of our small games is so that we could go to investors and say, hey, look, we sold 10,000 copies of this, just to show them that you can. Yes, you can look up stats. No, they're not always accurate. Some companies, especially the privately held ones, they don't have to release anything. You
Right.
know?
I mean, we made 3 games in Unity, not solely, but largely for the purpose of building towards making Stash. We made Tower of Elements, Dungeon of Elements, and Rainmaker. Each game was a significant leap forward from the previous one, both in time, quality, and sales, and budget. So each game built on each other, and we used those games and the information we gathered from those games to not only make the next ones, but also to raise money to make those next ones. So for that first 1 or 2 games, that's why you're really not going to want to seek out investors or anything like that unless you have some kind of incredible hook or incredible piece of technology or something very unusual. They're not going to be interested since you have no history of any kind of delivering on a claim that you can make a game. Because that's definitely something that is underrated by gamers and underrated by novice game developers, is how difficult it is to finish a game and launch it. In the industry, people understand how difficult that is. So having that first 1 or 2 games that you completed is a huge accomplishment because you've learned so many lessons about budgeting and project management and things like that. So as far as being able to estimate that information, there is information you can find online by doing research. Gama Sutra posts, a lot of developers will post postmortems, about, hey, this is our game. We did A, B, and C. It resulted in this much sales, but we also spent this much. And you can find both success stories and horror stories. You can find stories like there's a game, I won't mention their name because it's kind of harsh, where they raised $750,000. They made their game, they launched it, and they sold $1,500 on Steam. They made a lot of mistakes, and so you can read about their game, and benefit from those mistakes. But then there's plenty of success stories also, where they'll say, hey, we had 10 people, each one of us, brought $20,000 of our own savings to the or friends and family to the company. That was our $200,000 nest egg. We used it. We made this game. We sold on this platform, this platform, this platform. Then we localized it to other languages and sold this much. There's a lot of that information through postmortems of other games that you can read through. Fortunately, there are a lot of indie developers who will share that information. But to answer your specifically about the mobile stuff, I mean, that is a slaughterhouse. I would definitely advise, it's completely a race to the bottom. I would advise against making a game on mobile to the strongest degree possible. Almost all the money is made by the top 25, and the amount of money they spend on marketing is astronomical. Like the games that are Mobile Strike, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, or their previous one, the Dawn of War with the Kate Upton, they would spend a couple $1 million to make the game, but then they would spend 20 times that, $40-50 million to market the game.
Now, that isn't to say you shouldn't release on mobile, but
Right.
your game, there are so many different engines now that you can create a game and you can release on mobile in addition to releasing on other platforms. So
Right, but
I'm
targeting
saying,
mobile
yeah,
directly and thinking
Right.
you're going to hit those $1 million a day, transactions at those games, that's so exceptionally unlikely. I would honestly say it's virtually impossible right now. I mean, you're not even seeing indie hits anymore on mobile games. You're not even seeing Angry Birds type things happening anymore. What you're seeing is
King.
games from King
And King just shut down a studio.
and who's the other one I want to call it?
Heyday is Supercell.
Supercell, right. You're seeing, 2 or 3 companies making the only games that are successful. And the other problem too is some stats came out. I believe it's the average mobile gamer only spends money on, I think it's 1.2 games. So what that means is the vast majority of, and that's the average overall. So your mobile gamer basically spends money one time on one game, and they're in their lifetime as a mobile gamer. So it's probably not going to be your game. It's probably going to already be Clash of Clans or something like that. Yes.
Do you think that the freemium model and is the way to go, or has sort of done its gone, it's gone by the wayside, and paying so much for an app is better, or having an app driven by ads is better?
Well, first of all, I mean, if we're talking mobile specifically, if you're not King or Supercell or whatever, they're probably none of them are going to work. I mean, it's really that depressing. If you're on other platforms, freemium is still extremely successful. Our game Stash uses the free-to-play model. It's still extremely effective with a lot of games. However, I did read the developers. I think their game is The Room and The Room 2 and The Room 3. Their games are on mobile, and it's a paid app. It's like $5 or $10 for each episode. If you've built a fan base that like your kind of game, then that can work. Especially the more niche the game is, you may have more hardcore fans who are willing to pay $5 or $10. At least then each customer has paid you something, so then you can afford to provide support and feedback and things like that, which you can't when, if you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of free customers who will never spend anything, you can't even afford to provide them support. So as far as making a game on a budget, I think mobile is virtually impossible right now. Console is also difficult because there's so many upfront costs and certification and things like that, which makes the PC really one of the best platforms because you have the most options for releasing and launching your game, including literally launching it on your own website. No other platform has the ability really for you to just self-launch. Mobile has the iTunes store. Consoles, you have to go through Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo. The PC is the only one where you can launch it yourself. And even if you want other things like Steam, those are actually a lot more reachable than iTunes or something like that. So,
Yeah, I think we're. Does anybody have any other questions?
yes.
What is your determination on how you set a sale price on a game? How you determine if you want to make it free to play or $5, $10?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So obviously, if you're free to play, you're free to play, and then you have to do a really good job creating the content of things that people are going to want to pay for. That if you have no experience with free to play games, that can be extremely difficult, and is probably not the best thing to do for your first game unless you actually have a lot of experience playing free to play games and seeing things that worked on you and worked on other people. So put that in one group because that's free to play. Other than that, one of the best ways to set your price is to look at other games that are similar to the game that you're going to make, see what they sold their game for, because that's the way gamers are going to look at it. They're going to say, oh, hey, this is a tower defense game. It's a lot like, tower defense game A, B, and C. They sold their game for $20. I should probably sell my game for right around $20. One thing that can be dangerous is setting your price too low, because there is definitely a psychology that people have. The price of your game signals something about its quality. If your game is 99 cents, you might think, oh, it's 99 cents. So when people buy it, they won't have really high expectations. Unfortunately, expectations don't drop all that much. Gamers typically, no matter how much they pay for your game, they expect a lot, which is okay. I mean, they have spent money. That's to some extent that's fair. So the price of your game will signal something about its quality, and it won't necessarily give you a free pass anyway. Typically, for our RPG puzzle games, we sold them for $10 or $15 on Steam, and I think that worked out pretty well. I think we were happier at the $15 price point than the $10. It definitely gave us a little room if we ever did want to have a sale to not have to go too low. I believe that when you go under $10 or under $9.99, you start to really make your game look like a budget, kind of schlocky kind of a thing, and that may attract the wrong kind of customer, and it may actually dissuade people who like your genre, thinking, well, I don't even want to waste my time on some $5 piece of trash. But if it was 10 or 15 and this trailer looked good, they might be like, hey, this is a serious game. So be careful about pricing your game too low.
And it's really important to be mindful of pricing when you're going from mobile to PC. We have a few developer friends who have gone from having an app to trying to sell it on Steam, and they got pretty heavily slaughtered because obviously they charged more for the PC price, but then everybody just went and looked and saw that it was way cheaper on the App Store and wanted to know why that was going on. So
And
stuff like that, you
now,
have
if
to
you've
be really
massively
careful about.
improved it, and added multiplayer and this and that, then you might be able to justify it, but it's still a concern.
Yeah.
And if you're doing free to play, something that's really important to keep in mind, there will be a lot of people who will consider it a virtue to play your game for free, and they will constantly try to get you to remove things that cost real money. Oh, this should be gettable in game. And you have to resist that. There have to be things in your free-to-play game that people really, really want, or else they'll never buy things. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying pay to win. We don't do pay to win. But you have to have some things that are very attractive that can only be bought with whatever the virtual currency is or whatever the microtransaction currency is. And you have to stay strong on that, and you can't let your people that are trying to play forever free convince you to convert those away or make those earnable in some other way, or else you'll never make money free to play. And that's something that's important for gamers to understand, is that playing a game for free is not a virtue. And even though it's called free to play, that's kind of a misnomer. If the game really was free, then the company would go out of business. So if you're pricing free to play, you really have to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Or if your kid asks you for, hey, this game I play so much of, can I have like $10 worth of whatever currency it is? If they've spent 100 hours of it, the developer probably, it wouldn't hurt to send them $10,
Right. Yep.
Anyways.
All right, I think we're at our time limit. So any last minute questions or? All right, I think we're good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, George.